Okay, welcome to the second slide. In this slide, we're going to go over the homework and we're going to talk about Helen and how to answer the questions that I asked about her and the reading, which was an excerpt from The Story of My Life by Helen Keller. So, the first question on the homework was, what are assimilation and accommodation? What schemas does Helen have when Annie arrives? When Annie tries to teach Helen the word doll, how does this information fit into Helen's existing schema? How does Helen assimilate and accommodate the new words Annie teaches her? Is the process different for non-physical concepts? Why and how? So first of all, assimilation and accommodation is how we create and adapt schemas for information that we have. It's based on Piaget's theory of cognitive development. So assimilation is when we take in new information and we can just add it to existing schemas. It just pops right down in there. Accommodation, on the other hand, is when we have to adjust our schemas to accommodate new information. So we have to adapt how we organize our information because we have been presented with new information that does not currently fit, so we have to change the whole system. So, what schemas does Helen have when Annie arrives? So Helen has a number of schemas when Annie arrives, including a schema for finger play. So Helen also knew some sign language, and we're going to read a little bit about that. Meanwhile, the desire to express myself grew. The few signs I used became less and less adequate, and my failures to make myself understood were invariably followed by outbursts of passion. I felt as if invisible hands were holding me, and I made frantic efforts to free myself. So she had some sign language. These are called home signs. She knew how to sign that she was thirsty, that she was hungry. She could indicate that she wanted something. She could say yes or no, that kind of thing. And then we also know that she had a schema for finger play because it's in the reading. We can read, running downstairs to my mother, I held up my hand and made the letters for doll. I did not know that I was spelling a word, or even that words existed. I was simply making my fingers go in a monkey-like imitation. In the days that followed, I learned to spell in this uncomprehending way a great many words, among them pin, hat, cup, and a few verbs like sit, stand, and walk. But my teacher had been with me several weeks before I understood that everything has a name. So she did not yet have a schema for individual words, or that you can finger spell what words are. When Annie tries to teach Helen the finger spelling of doll, how does that fit into her existing schema? It fit in as a finger play, as a fun thing that we can do. Look, mommy, I can do a thing that my teacher taught me how to do. She didn't understand that it was a word and that it was a representative thing. This means that she was going to have to accommodate that information and figure that out. How does Helen assimilate and accommodate the new words Annie teaches her? So eventually we get down to one day while I was playing with my doll, Miss Sullivan put my big rag doll into my lap also, spelled D-O-L-L, and tried to make me understand that D-O-L-L applied to both. Earlier in the day, we had had a tussle over the words M-U-G and W-A-T-E-R. Miss Sullivan had tried to impress it upon me that M-U-G is mug and W-A-T-E-R is water, but I persisted in confounding the two. In despair, she had dropped the subject for the time, only to renew it at the first opportunity. I became impatient at her repeated attempts, and seizing the new doll, I dashed it upon the floor. I was keenly delighted when I felt the fragments of the broken doll at my feet. Neither sorrow nor regret followed my passionate outburst. I had not loved the doll. In the still dark world in which I lived, there was no strong sentiment or tenderness. I felt my teacher sweep the fragments to one side of the hearth, and I had a sense of satisfaction that the cause of my discomfort was removed. Now, remember in the textbook how we were talking about how assimilation and accommodation can cause disequilibrium, which is an uncomfortable feeling. So as we're learning information, if it doesn't fit into our existing schema and we can't simply assimilate it, we have to accommodate it. And this and this starts with a feeling of disequilibrium, this feeling of discomfort that things aren't fitting and the knowledge doesn't work and this new thing is stressful. And it can feel quite stressful for children, and this is something that Helen is feeling in the book, that she's feeling this stress of disequilibrium, of knowledge not fitting and not understanding what is happening. Then she has her moment of gaining equilibrium a little bit later. As the cool stream gushed over one hand, she spelled into the other word, water. First slowly, then rapidly. I stood still, my whole attention fixed upon the motions of her fingers. Suddenly, I felt a misty consciousness, as of something forgotten, a thrill of returning thought, and somehow the mystery of language was revealed to me. I knew then that W-A-T-E-R meant the wonderful cool something that was flowing over my hands. The living word awakened my soul, gave it light, hope, joy, set it free. There were barriers still, it is true, but barriers that could in time be swept away. So, that was her moment of equilibrium, when she finally accommodated this information and she was aware that these finger plays that she had previously put under the fun category were in fact representations of concepts like water and doll. And so she now had accommodated that information. She had developed a new schema in which to put these words. The last bit of the question was, is the process different for non-physical concepts? Why and how? So this was a little trickier, but yes, it was different for non-physical concepts because these aren't concepts that she could touch. Remember, Helen can't see and she can't hear, so her communication at this point, there is still a significant language barrier. And so communicating these concepts, if you can't touch a thing and you can't see it and you can't hear it, then how do you comprehend it if your only way of getting information in is by touching it? You can't touch love. And this is something that we see in the readings. What is love? I asked. She drew me closer to her and said, "It is here," pointing to my heart, whose beats I was conscious of for the first time. Her words puzzled me, very much because I did not then understand anything unless I touched it. I smelt the violence in her hand and asked, half in words, half in signs, a question which meant, "Is love the sweetness of flowers?" "No," said my teacher. Again I thought. The warm sun was shining on us. "Is this not love?" I asked, pointing in the direction from which the heat came. "Is this not love?" It seemed to me that there could be nothing more beautiful than the sun, whose warmth makes all things grow. But Miss Sullivan shook her head, and I was greatly puzzled and disappointed. I thought it strange that my teacher could not show me love. A day or two after, I was stringing beads of different sizes in symmetrical groups. 2 large beads, 3 small ones, and so on. I had made many mistakes, and Miss Sullivan had pointed them out again and again with gentle patience. Finally, I noticed a very obvious error in the sequence, and for an instant I concentrated my attention on the lesson and tried to think how I could have arranged the beads. Miss Sullivan touched my forehead and spelled with decided emphasis, "Think." In a flash, I knew that the word was the name of the process that was going on in my head. This was the first conscious perception of an abstract idea. So, before she could understand love, she needed a schema for abstract ideas. And think was how she accommodated that information, that there are such things as abstract ideas. From there, she was better able to assimilate the concept of love. For a long time, I was still. I was not thinking of the beads in my lap, but trying to find a meaning for love in light of this new idea. The sun had been under a cloud all day, and there had been brief showers, but suddenly the sun broke forth in all its southern splendor. Again I asked my teacher, "Is this not love?" "Love is something like the clouds that were in the sky before the sun came out," she replied. Then in simpler words than these, which at the time I could not have understood, she explained, "You cannot touch the clouds, you know, but you can feel the rain and know how glad the flowers and the thirsty earth are to have it after a hot day. You cannot touch love either, but you can feel the sweetness that it pours into everything. Without love, you would not be happy nor want to play. The beautiful truth burst upon my mind. I felt that there were invisible lines stretched between the spirit and the spirits of others. So now she can understand what love is. So the process of assimilating and accommodating abstract ideas, she needed a whole new schema for that as well. So she needed the schema that finger plays can represent specific concepts and ideas, but then she also needed a schema for abstract ideas, so that some things you can't touch and you can't smell, some things are not physical. Once she had both of these schemas, then she could understand the abstract idea of love. For the next question, identify and define the 3 types of memory in information processing. How does Helen exemplify information processing theory? So the 3 types of memory in information processing theory are sensory, working, and long-term. Sensory memory is all of the information that we're bringing in. It's what we can touch, what we can see, what we can hear, smell, taste, feel, all of that. Then working memory is what we're thinking about right in that moment. So that is information that comes through the sensory memory to be processed, but it's also information that we take from our long-term memory into our working memory because we need that knowledge in the moment. And finally, long-term memory is the long-term storage. It's what we remember. It's the knowledge that we know. It's who we are, that kind of thing. What we can hold in our working memory is about 5 to 7 things, and we can only hold it there for a couple of seconds. So if we need to keep something in our working memory, we need to do what is called rehearsal. So we have to constantly be thinking about it. It's kind of like when we're looking for something, it helps if you say that thing out loud. So I need my keys. Keys, 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 keys. As long as you are rehearsing that you are looking for your keys, you are less likely to be distracted by other information. Now, Helen does exemplify the information processing theory quite nicely, starting with sensory memory. So she touches things. That is her sensory memory. As she brings information in through her senses, it is generally through touch. She then thinks about it in her working memory. So we can look at it this way. We can go back to, we can go back to the water section. As the cool stream gushed over one hand, she spelled into the other the word water. First slowly, then rapidly. So her sensory memory at this moment is feeling the water on her hand, and then on the other hand, she is feeling the finger spelling that her teacher is putting into her palm. That is her sensory information that she is then bringing into her working memory to process what is happening. So why does this feeling of the water over my hand, why is this being associated with this finger play on the other hand? So then through this working memory, she figures out, oh, they are associated. So this finger play represents the concept of water. That is really important. At this point, she changes her schemas, but also this information that the finger play is representative of water, and that specific finger play is representative of water, goes into her long-term memory. So now she will forever know that these specific signs mean water. And every time she needs to know about water, that will be brought back from her long-term memory into her working memory to be reprocessed. The next question was, which theory of language acquisition do you think most closely describes Helen's experiences? So there are a number of language acquisition theories that seem to fit quite well. The 2 biggest are the learning theory and the interactionist theory. And a lot of you, pretty much all of you, came up with those, so very well done for you. According to Erikson, what are the 2 stages of psychosocial development that infants and toddlers experience? How did Helen's experiences affect her psychosocial development in each of these stages? So, the first 2 stages of Erikson's theory are trust versus mistrust and autonomy versus shame and doubt. Helen experiences trust versus mistrust exactly as one would expect any infant to do. Now remember, Helen did not become disabled until she was 19 months old. Trust versus mistrust is only for the first year of life. So she learned to trust. She experienced a normal developmental curve throughout her infancy. However, as she was entering autonomy versus shame and doubt, she did become disabled, and so how she processed and how she developed did change a bit. And she both passed and did not pass this. She did, so her autonomy versus shame and doubt became very complicated, that stage of her development. And we can see how she is both autonomous, but then also not in the readings. For the autonomy, so the positives of her development, when she became more autonomous, we can look at that reading. I understood a good deal of what was going on about me. At 5, I had learned to fold and put away my clean clothes when they were brought in from the laundry, and I distinguished my own from the rest. I knew by the way my mother and aunt dressed whether they were going out, and I invariably begged to go with them. I was always sent for when there was company, and when the guests took their leave, I waved my hand to them, I think with a vague remembrance of the meaning of the gesture. One day some gentlemen called on my mother, and I felt the shutting of the front door and other sounds that indicated their arrival. So she can communicate. She has some autonomy here. She can fold her own clothes. And then we can also go on a little bit further. My mother, moreover, succeeded in making me understand a good deal. I always knew when she wished me to bring her something, and I would run upstairs or anywhere else that she indicated. Indeed, I owe to her loving wisdom all that was bright and good in my long night. So Helen liked doing these tasks for her mother, and she felt a sense of pride in them. Autonomy versus shame and doubt, the biggest thing is, can I do a task and finish it? And is that a good thing? Am I okay to be independent? And her mother is supporting her in this developmental stage. She is learning some independence. That said, she does also struggle with the shame and doubt aspect because she is not able to be as autonomous as most children her age, and she is not able to be as autonomous as she would like, and she finds this very frustrating. So, for example, the reading that we touched on earlier in this video, but we're going to expand on here. Meanwhile, the desire to express myself grew. The few signs I used became less and less adequate, and my failures to make myself understood were invariably followed by outbursts of passion. I felt as if invisible hands were holding me, and I made frantic efforts to free myself. I struggled. Not that struggling helped matters, but the spirit of resistance was strong within me. I generally broke down in tears and physical exhaustion. If my mother happened to be near, I crept into her arms, too miserable even to remember the cause of the tempest. After a while, the needs of some means of communication became so urgent that these outbursts occurred daily, sometimes hourly. So, we can see that she's trying to communicate, she is trying to be autonomous, and she is failing, and because of this, she is starting to feel not so much shame, but doubt in her abilities, whether or not she can be successful, and she is reverting. She is going back to her mother and being more of an infant and a baby in development, because she does not trust that she doubts that she can be a human being and that it is okay to be her. And this is becoming a major issue. And that's why her parents went and got her a teacher, because they didn't know how to help her, so they felt that it was time to get outside help. The final question was, in what order do infants develop emotions? Describe how Helen's emotions developed. How does this differ from the norm described in the textbook? So in the textbook, we learned that there are primary emotions and secondary emotions. Primary emotions like joy, happiness, anger, that kind of thing, all develop before 18 months of age. So Helen learned those emotions and developed them normally because she was not yet disabled. However, her secondary emotions like shame and doubt and pride and jealousy, those she did not develop right away, and she did not develop them as a normal child would at the times that you would expect developmentally. And this is because she did not have the ability to communicate and social reference the way most children did. So because she was now blind and deaf, her parents couldn't show her when she hurt them. They couldn't show her how to be proud of herself, but also how to be ashamed of herself, how to feel guilt and that kind of thing. And so she did not feel those things. She talks about how there was no shame in her life yet, and how later on she would feel ashamed. So I hope that was helpful. In the next slide, we're going to talk about the lifespan case study and kind of what you need to cover, and we're going to look at the rubric a bit.